I'm looking at the investment space where every investment does have an impact. It promotes a good company or a bad company, a company that's doing something good in the world or destructive. And as an investor, you have the power to direct your investments towards those companies that are creating goods and services in the world that are doing something good. And that is why Bill and I wrote that book.
How about if you worked one more year and you resolved to give away everything you made that year after you paid your taxes and see what that's like? And then try doing that a second year and a third year and see what it's like and see if you don't find the incredible joy of writing those big checks.
Welcome to a Listen to Learn episode of the Share Life podcast. I'm Jason Scott Montoya, and today I'm speaking with the authors of the book Stewards Not Owners, The Joy of Aligning Your Money with Your Faith, Dana and Bill Wichterman. Dana and Bill, say hello.
Hello.
Hey, good to be with you.
Yes, thank you for joining and sharing your stewardship wisdom with us today. Dana is a senior advisor at Impact Foundation and founded the Faith-Driven Entrepreneur and Investor Network in Washington, D.C. Bill is a former White House special assistant, co-founded Wedgwood Circle and leads Faith and Law as board president. In their book, the Wichtermans inspire a perspective shift from owning to steward, viewing wealth, work, and resources as God's gifts to be used with purpose. Stewards Not Owners provides insights on values-based investing, generosity, thoughtful budgeting, and more. In this conversation, we're going to focus on two ideas within the book, giving versus investing, and stewardship versus ownership. Before we dive into my questions, Dana and Bill, tell me a bit about your background and what led you both to write this book and share the idea.
Sure. Well, I'll start. Even as a little girl, I always felt that I was put on this earth to do something to make it better. Kind of like when you go to a campsite, always leave it better than you found it. And I feel like all of us here have a purpose and a meaning for why we're here. So looking for that impact, you could call it calling, has been a lifelong quest. And so looking at our resources and our money and how we steward those, it's just a practical way to see how we can then have a more effective impact in the areas that we're supposed to have an impact in. It doesn't mean that each one of us is supposed to solve all global problems, but we're each here equipped to help fix something that's broken, make something that's ugly more beautiful in this world. So that's kind of been my lifelong quest. I worked in government for many years, looking at government as a lever for change. And then I worked in the nonprofit sector, which I also think is another good lever for change. And we'll talk about giving and those interventions. But then now I'm looking at the investment space where every investment does have an impact. It promotes a good company or a bad company, a company that's doing something good in the world or destructive. And so as an investor, you have the power to direct your investments towards those companies that are creating goods and services in the world that are actually doing something good in the world. And so that is why Bill and I wrote that book, is that we have had a long life of kind of trying to think through how to have positive impact. And we wanted to, first of all, tell stories of other people who are doing it well. So the book has 24 stories of just amazing people living a life surrendered into stewardship. And then we also just bring in the practical tools as well.
Okay. You have these different levers you mentioned. Dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah. So when we think of being change makers or, having a positive impact, we think of what are the interventions, what are the skills, and what are the tools that we would need. And obviously, almost every intervention requires some amount of finances, right? You start a nonprofit or your podcast requires some finances. It also requires skills. It requires your relationships and ideas, right? So there's different levels of investment. And so I would say that is kind of what we're talking about. Bill, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that actually captured it. Yeah.
Well, Bill, what would you say to someone who's like, what is stewardship mindset? Like, what is stewardship, not ownership? How do you think about that? What's the origin and source of where that comes from?
Yeah, it really comes from this notion. I think it's fundamentally a theological notion, right? Of you're given your life. I would actually argue our lives are principally responsibilities given to us, and we're supposed to steward them. rather than gifts that we get to do whatever we want with, right? That notion of like, well, you just go and do what you want now, it's yours. I think there's always there's always strings with God. It says in the Old Testament that God is a jealous God. And I remember
Okay.
as a kid thinking like, jealous? Well, we're not supposed to be jealous, so why would God be jealous?
Yeah.
What that really means is God hates idolatry, and he will brook no rivals. He wants us completely for himself. He's not looking for a religion, which is a box checking kind of thing, where, you kind of get a cut of your life and God gets his portion and I get my portion. He's not interested in that. He
Yeah.
wants to own us and all of us. And that includes even those parts where we might otherwise linger. You think about the story of the rich young man in Scripture, where he said, "What do I have to do, Jesus, to get eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Well, follow the commands." He lists a few of them. He's like, he brightens up. He's like, "That's great. I've done all those since I was a kid." And he said, "One thing you lack: sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and come and follow me." And he went away sad because he had great wealth, is what Scripture says. Now, does God call most of us to give away everything? No. We think you're supposed to surrender everything to God. For most of us, that doesn't mean the same as giving it all away. Surrendering means letting it be under his control. But you saw a guy who had most of his life under the lordship of Christ. So just one kind of part that he wanted to own all by himself. And I think that's out of bounds to be what it means to be a follower of Christ. Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever
Yeah.
wants to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for me will save it. I think that notion of looking at everything we have, including our money, which is often a stronghold for people, is liberating. And a lot of people recoil at this notion. They're afraid of it. And that's why we put it in the subtitle of our book, The Joy of Aligning Your Money with Faith. Because what we found in the 24 stories of the people we interviewed was the incredible joy that people had in surrendering all of their resources to God, including all of their money.
Yeah. So you mentioned the fear. Dive into that. Like, what are the fears that people have about that surrender?
Well, I think when you first hear that word again, you feel like you're losing control. You've worked so hard. This is, and so I think for at least for me, it was a lack of trust. Like it really revealed like, wait, if God is really a good God, then he wouldn't have me steward the resources he's giving me in any other way that's both, than would be good. So I think some of it is a learning process. And I think people, he's also gives us a lot of grace to stumble and fail and try again. So I wouldn't say people have to just be perfect at this. You start small, start with little bits of giving and see what kind of joy comes from that. And I would argue sometimes it doesn't come right away. It comes later after you see the impact or the fruits. And so I would say it's exercising certain virtue muscles. Generosity is something you need to walk into and think creatively about how to be a generous person. I mean, even in thought, like your platform is a generous platform for thinking and inviting people into thoughts. And I think we need to be curious people. We need to kind of try to address generosity in every aspect of our life, including our time and our friendships. The home we own, hospitality, can be all about generosity if we think about it that way.
Yeah. So how do you think about just money generally speaking as an idea and how it applies to stewardship specifically?
Well, money is one of the things we steward. We also steward our time, our talents, our ties, our relationships. But money is one important way. And that's what we actually focused on in the book. We thought about doing kind of a more comprehensive stewardship book, but we had so much to say just about stewardship of money that we thought, no, that's good enough for this book. We'll maybe in another book we'll do it otherwise. But I think it's a stronghold. There's a reason that it's called mammon. It's given kind of a demonic name in Scripture, because for many people it's very hard to give up the notion of control of your money. And as Dana said, there's all that fear, what that could mean. And look, there are things that are fearful about it. I mean, following God can be a fearful thing. That's been my life. When he asked me to give up something that I don't want to give up, that's hard, right? And if you just want to be on the throne of your own heart, then you may as well stop kidding yourself that you're a Christian, because to be a follower of Christ means you've got to surrender. So we think, though, in the money space, I do think it's a blind spot for a lot of people. I think a lot of people come to it saying God gets his cut, kind of like the tax man. You know, you pay your taxes and the rest of the money is yours. I pay my tithe and the rest is ours. And I don't think that's the way it works. I think a tithe is there as a way of supporting the church in particular, but it's a floor, not a ceiling. And it doesn't mean that the other 90% is yours to do whatever you want with.
Yeah.
It goes all the way down to your spending, your saving, your investing. Every bit of it is to be under the lordship of Christ.
Now, talk to me about this idea of how stewardship and sustainably doing it, and then the relationship between that. You mentioned generosity earlier, Dana, but also the idea of charity and how that relates. Like, kind of tease out these different layers for us.
Sure. So when we talk about savings, which you would then use for either investing or for charity, right? So you first have to generate excess capacity from your own needs, right? Which that would be through wise savings over time. And then once you have savings, you're giving to charity. And I think, again, you look at the areas that God's called you, the impact he wants you to have, including your local church and maybe your neighbors and, other things like that. And then you're investing, which investing again is supposed to make money. That's fine. That's what businesses do. But again, we want to make sure that our investments are also having multiple bottom lines, right? Of making money, but also doing good in the world. And there are a lot of financial advisors now that help you screen out bad investments and screen in good investments. But when you talk about impact, I think that we in the West use the lens of nonprofits are supposed to solve all problems. And it means give money to a nonprofit and all their interventions are going to be helpful. And I think that's only true in certain interventions, disaster relief, something that's never going to charge someone, like going to church. You don't charge someone for going to church. So therefore you need a tithe. And there's a lot of disaster situations or crises or disability type things where they're going to need charity. And that's a fully appropriate intervention. But I think when we're talking about poverty alleviation over the long run, if you only give hand-ups and not handouts rather than hand-ups, you're actually putting a Band-Aid on the problem and not getting at the core of the problem, which people need good jobs.
Yeah.
So, and they need dignified jobs. And so to do that, you need to create businesses that are going to provide those jobs. And once you give someone a dignified, fair wage, sustainable job, they will solve their own problems. They will be able to pay for their children's health care, for their children's education. So I think that's kind of what we argue, is looking at some longer term strategies and which things are more effective for what problem you're solving. And I think too often charity, because it has to be continually funded by fundraising, is not creating the engine of growth, the market mechanism that will literally help countries lift most of their people out of poverty.
Okay. So what would be an example of a sustainable engine that doesn't require that constant giving to make it go?
Like a business. So let me just tell you about a particular one that we love. It's founded by a guy named John Porter. He's featured in our book. John was planning to go be kind of a missionary aid worker in Haiti. and he had this encounter with God in his car in a parking garage before he had an interview, where essentially it's the opposite of what you usually think. The Lord called him, no, I want you to go into business. So he went into business, and he actually moved to Rwanda, and he started a creamery providing yogurt and other kind of dairy products, which are much needed in the developing world. He currently has 60 people working for Masaka Farms, the name of this creamery. It is for profit. It has employs a majority of people who are deaf, which in Rwanda, if you're deaf, you're not going to get a job and you're not going to be valued by the society. You're going to be considered dead weight, worthless. Here, they get dignifying jobs. They get a community of a lot of other deaf people. They can learn sign language that way. They can find marriage mates. But this is a for-profit business. It's dignified. That business every year is growing and growing. They're getting into new elements. Think of that, what it would cost to provide the money to support those 60 workers. You'd have to raise that money year after year. There's no money to be raised in this case. They're selling a product. And their kids will then grow up in a home where they have food security, where they have health security. When they get sick, they can call a doctor. And when they can go to school. Those are huge things in any culture, but also in Africa. And they won't grow up with a poverty mindset. So that's the poverty prevention that Dana was talking about. The kids don't emerge from poverty because they weren't in poverty, right? And the parents got a job. So we just think that jobs are the best way to address many issues, not every issue, but in the poverty space, definitely. Jobs are far more efficacious than nonprofits, in part because the nonprofit pool of funding is so small relative to the investable assets that are available to generate jobs in the world. And so it's a problem of scale. A lot of people have gone into business as mission, said, I just realized that the problems were too big for nonprofits.
Yeah. And are there problems that are too big for businesses?
Yeah, there's problems that are too big for businesses. I mean, business can't save your soul. That's a whole different rubric. But in general, so it depends what the problem are. But when you're talking about economically, it's generally business is what you're going to need. Now, you do need to have a macroeconomic system that makes sense. You need to have the rule of law. You need to have an absence of widespread corruption. There's a whole bunch of other things that are beyond the reach of a particular business person. And so if you have an unjust government, which as soon as your business succeeds, they're going to come in and, harvest it for their own use, well, that's a terrible thing. And that's going to keep everybody poor. I used to live in West Berlin, Germany. And I used to go to the east side. So that was when the wall was up, the Berlin Wall. Many of your listeners might not even remember that, Jason. It came down in 1989. But there was the communist side and the free side. And I would go to the end of my neighborhood. I would go through Checkpoint Charlie to get to the east side, the communist side. And immediately I just saw poverty relative to what was on the west side. And it was a bad economic system.
And so I guess, what does stewardship look like if you're in that type of context?
Well, I think, again, it's somewhat individual of what God has given you dominion over. So it might look like civil disobedience. It might look like encouraging good policies and trying to persuade the government to change. So again, government is a lever. They have to build roads. Like, one individual business will not be building the interstate highway, right? So you have to pour yourself into good governance. And that's why we need good academics and good intellectuals to be percolating the right ideas of what is the good society. And then we need people to be the kind of citizens, informed citizens that will, at least in our case, vote in a way that will create these right enabling environments.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the kind of the difference between a good outcome or a bad outcome, or a good nonprofit or a bad one. Like, how are you defining what you consider good and bad in terms of investing into those organizations?
Okay, well, that's somewhat based on what people's priorities are for an outcome. I would say that most people would say that if a company is just polluting the groundwater around it, that's a bad outcome. If they are working their employees to the bone and not compensating them, that might be a bad operating principle. Um, if they are producing something that is creating addiction towards pornography or whatever, again, bad outcome. Now, you can have all kinds of different values. Someone might be fine investing in the alcohol industry because if you can use it wisely, it can be a real joy. If you have addiction in your family, you may say, no, I really don't want to promote that industry. So some things are personal and values based depending on that individual.
Yeah.
But I think there are a lot of things that we all can agree on. I look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals that says, what kind of global problems are we trying to solve? And so those are one indicator to look at. Say who, and then who's doing it most efficiently, most effectively, um, and that'll have a different lens as well.
Yeah. And so, where does the idea of redemptive investing play a part in all this?
So Dana talked about negative screens and then positive screens in business. So a negative screen is like Dana was saying, I don't want to invest in, I don't want to invest in strip clubs, right? All right, that's a negative screen. Doesn't matter if I get a good return on my dollar, I'm not going to do that. A positive screen is something of where you see a business which is well run, which provides dignity and respect for the employees and provides a good product which helps the world smile, right? It's a flourishing product. As Dana said, not everybody's going to look at that the same way, but if it lines up that way for you, it's a beautiful thing. When you get a business like that, you think, wow, this is really changing the world. There's some medical devices that we've invested in. One of them, if it comes to pass and can get FDA approval, will help older women who have UTIs, urinary tract infections, which is one of the leading reasons that older women go to the emergency room. It will take care of that. Well, that would be a beautiful thing, right? That helps the world flourish. We would love to see that.
Mhm. Yeah. And so, how much of that type of a focus, is that just a piece of the larger pie, or is that the one of the primary ways to look at the investing?
That's a hard question. I think what we would like to encourage people is to say that all of their investments should be values aligned. Now, that doesn't mean all of them are invested in private companies that are doing good, or, there are some public ETFs and things that are also value screen. But I think even just where you bank, when your money's sitting in a bank, that bank is using it to loan to other places. Well, kind of look at the values of your bank. So I would say it kind of, you want to look at your entire uh, all your investments. Are they something that if the Lord said, open your books, I'd like to check out how your investments are doing, he'd be pleased with where you're putting your money. You're putting
Yeah.
his money. So
Yeah. And part of that kind of gets to the idea that that no matter where that money's coming from or where you're placing it, you're back to what you said earlier about responsibility. You're responsible to God for the outcomes that your money and time and focus, the return you get from that, right? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, and I'd also say we're responsible to our fellow human being. The whole concept of the common good.
Mm.
Um, I think we've become such an individualistic country that we don't even think about, well, we have a responsibility for the commons,
Yeah.
and to make sure that those commons function well for everyone. And I am my brother's keeper in the sense, to the extent that I can help them not be harmed and also flourish, I'd like to do that.
Yeah. Dive more into that that individualistic thinking, where it comes from and why it's so harmful?
So I think individualism is deep in the DNA of America, right? And it also, though, is in another way deep in the DNA of the human heart, right? There's that sense that I am my own master. And even though our culture and society is much more individualistic, I think even if you're in a more communal society, still there's that sense that um, I get to, I can still make decisions that are going to be about me. And I think that God wants the decisions to be about Him. If you look at your life as itself something for you to steward, something which has been given to you not just for your own pleasure, but as it says in the Westminster Confession, what is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. That sense of enjoying Him and glorying in Him. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. And Colossians 3:23 says, let's see if I can pull it out. That's funny. I know it so well that I can't even pull it out of my head right now. The point is, you do all your work unto Christ, right? And it's like it's the Lord. It says that it is the Lord Christ you are serving. So if you have that attitude about it, everything you're doing, it's pretty hard to be individualistic at that point. Tim Keller used to write he wrote a little book I'm reading right now called about self-forgetfulness. He said being humble isn't thinking less of yourself. It's thinking about yourself less. And if you have that attitude of a servant, because service is what we are all called to. We're all called to serve God. We're all called to serve our fellow humans. And if we have that attitude and mentality in everything we do, it's transformative. And it includes, therefore, our money.
Yeah. So would you say that the idea of autonomy being that hyper individualistic, that worldview is in direct competition with a stewardship mindset then? I
think so. Dana and I are both strong individuals. We have a strong sense of self, but I think it has to be under the lordship of Christ. And I begin my day with my own liturgy that I made up, Jason. It goes like this. It said, you made me, you saved me, you own me, and you love me. There's nothing that I have that's not from you. There's nothing that's not a gift. I will choose to rejoice in today's hardships as an opportunity to become more like you, and I will choose not to fear my future. And all of that liturgy is really about God's ownership of me. That's kind of the fundamental theme that runs through all those sentences.
Yeah. Now, if you're talking to someone that's not a Christian, is there an argument that you could make to them about stewardship, or does that step required to make that leap?
No, I think you can talk about being values aligned and purpose and meaning. That I think most people have the idea of, when you talk to them, that they have a purpose that's outside of just fulfilling their own desires. Most people are not hedonists, right? They understand that love of neighbor, love of creation is an important thing and it's even been proven in secular studies. The recent flourishing study put out by Harvard and Baylor University, which looks at a whole bunch of indicators for flourishing, shows that there's a lot of things that are involved with serving other people. And so I think you can make that argument to most people that it's important to get outside of yourself. And then I think also people are discovering that being a lone island is lonely, and that community is a beautiful thing. I don't know how you can have love unless you have community, because love takes two people, at least.
Yeah. So what would you say, because there does seem to be, I mean, the Surgeon General a few years ago said something like we are in a loneliness epidemic. So what would you say about that, and how it relates as an encouragement to someone that might be listening that is maybe in that state and kind of likes what you're saying but doesn't know where to start or how to move forward there?
I actually think generosity is a great antidote to loneliness. That's not the purpose, the primary purpose. I'd say it's an ancillary benefit, though.
Yeah.
Because when you are being generous, you are seeing a need and you're entering into that person's need and you're helping to solve that need. I think there's many people who spend a lot of time on the psychotherapy couch looking inside that would do so well to get out and to be thinking about serving others and finding other people's needs and how to address those. And
Yeah.
it does connect you to people. Now, like all things, it can be twisted. So is it possible, if you're being generous, that you might still kind of get a savior complex and kind of start expecting all the praise and adulation that comes with being a giver? Yeah, that's a bad thing. I think that's one of the reasons that Jesus said, on the one hand, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing when you're giving, in contradistinction to that guy who had come with all the trumpets to put his gift into the treasury of the temple. But he also said, let your light shine and put it on a hill so that others might see it. So I think it's a heart disposition. And if your heart is fundamentally, if you're being generously, really just for self-aggrandizement, it's not going to work. I mean, there's going to be some benefits to it, but it's not the same as, no, I really want to help you. If we could talk about retirement for a second, Jason, one of the things we write about in the book is challenging people to say, when you could retire and you hit that place where you said, you know what, I've got enough money saved up, I got enough of a pension or whatever it is, and I could stop working and enjoy my golden years on the golf course, on the boat, doing whatever. We say, how about if you worked one more year and you resolved to give away everything you made that year after you paid your taxes and see what that's like? And then try doing that a second year and a third year and see what it's like, and see if you don't find the incredible joy of writing those big checks, right? A whole year's net wages that you get to give away, and see how that transforms the world. We've seen people for whom they don't want to stop working until they are told, hey, it's time for you to stop working. Because they get incredible joy out of just giving and sharing with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of Rick Warren's TED Talk, where he talks about how when purpose-driven life became so successful and made so much money, he took all that money, he paid back the church everything it had ever paid him, and then he ended up doing reverse tithing, where he gave 90% of his money away. And just an inspirational example of like taking a step into that world that you're describing. Dana, do you have any thoughts on his story? Are you familiar with it?
Oh, I didn't know about the reverse tithe for him, but that's wonderful. We've got some people in our book that have that kind of thing. There's a guy and his wife who started a cashew company in Mozambique. And their whole intention for that is to have world-class cashews that can be sold around, and they are sold on QVC and Whole Foods, et cetera. But the idea is that eventually the 90% of the profits will be helping smallholder farmers in Mozambique, will be helping widows and orphans. And so he's got that 90-10 switch as well, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to your idea earlier, a business engine. I think that becomes more, in his case, it was a book that, just continues to be successful. But if you have something that's continuing to provide value to the market to make money, it really makes
Yeah, and this isn't, some people might think, oh, this is just for the rich. Oh, no. If you're a teacher and you've put in your 25 years and you're nearing 60 and you get to retire, and you've done the math with your financial advisor and you're like, yep, we can do this. You could just keep teaching, right? You don't have to stop. Just keep going and just give it away.
Well, and I think the other thing too to think about is you can also, if you think ahead, and some of them use it well and some I guess don't, but they've created a way to do something. And if they were that in a very generous way, that could. And I think if you kind of thought ahead, where you saved a certain number so that even after you stopped work, that you could just give away a lot, there's different, I guess I'm just trying to point out that there's different creative ways to tackle.
Well, actually, I work for a place called Impact Foundation, which allows people to create their own mini endowments. It's a donor advised fund. So you put your charitable capital in, it's in the charitable realm forever, right? It's got your tax deduction, but it's in an account that is for you to direct, and you can invest it. Not, you can also grant it and give it away to a, nonprofit, but then you don't see it again. You can invest it in transformational companies that will have more than just financial bottom line, but let's say they have a financial bottom line, it comes back into your account. It's like the goose that lays the golden egg. You can have recyclable impact in an account in a donor advised fund. And if you manage that well, you can continue to do that. That functions like a foundation.
Yeah. So I guess I'd be curious, like, if we really got serious, like as the church, stewardship and financial um, wisdom in the way that you're describing, like what kind of impact could we?
Well, it would be transformative, Jason, because first of all, let's just start with the tithe. Imagine if all Christians tithed. Right now, American Christians tithe about 3%. So tithe means 10, so they're not really tithing. They're giving about 3%. Imagine if they actually gave 10%. Oh my goodness. Nonprofits would be awash in money. That would be, all of them have more than 3 times what they've got right now. You have all kinds of great, well-funded ministries and charities. Now, what if you did what Dana's suggesting? That you actually start using some of that money that you put into a donor advised fund and you start investing it in businesses. Wow, that's really transformative. You start providing jobs to people. And, it's the old adage about give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Give a man a fishing pole, teach him to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime, right? So then think about that. Then think about lining up all of your money, everything that you have control over. If you can control your IRA, your bank account, if you have any stocks, any investments you have, and you start thinking, I'm going to be faith aligned with all of that money. Now you're talking about a really big pot of money. Can you imagine if Christians started doing that very consciously? We knew of one Christian foundation where they paid somebody to do an analysis of their endowment to see where they were invested. And lo and behold, they were invested in a lot of things that they were trying to counter through their charitable giving. So it was like the right hand and the left hand working against one another.
Yeah.
I think that happens a lot. I mean, and when Dana first heard about this, she was kind of intimidated by the thought that we'd have to go through stock by stock, like especially if you're in a mutual fund, how do you do this, whatever. But as Dana already mentioned, there are financial advisors that are called kingdom advisors. You can find them on the web. They're in all kinds of different financial houses, but they've been certified to be a kingdom advisor, and they will help you figure out, hey, how can I align my money with my faith? This does not have to be an overwhelming project. And by the way, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Just start somewhere. Don't get overwhelmed by it. Just start with one step.
Yeah, and I've seen a few ETFs out there. I imagine there's a lot of them that people could find to invest in that are right exactly what you're talking about. So that
Totally. Yeah, Sovereign's Capital has one, an ETF. Yep.
So how kind of, I guess I'm curious, just your own story. Is this something the two of you, when you first got married and together, were you already thinking this way, or is this something that evolved over time? Yeah.
Well, when we first got married, even before we got married, when we went through premarital counseling, they always talk about, are your financial philosophy aligned? And that was the one we spent a lot of time on to make sure. And we went through what the Larry Burkett Crown Financial Ministry, which Crown Financial Ministry still exists. They have wonderful materials. They're free. You can kind of get some of the basics. So I would encourage people to go there. And that's where we learn that basic spend no or save 10% or more, give 10% or more, try to reduce your debt, particularly unproductive debt. And then think through, investing, and the like, what is it? The eighth wonder of the world is compound interest. And it goes both ways. If you get into debt, you compound in the wrong direction. And if you are investing and paying off your debt and then saving, it goes amazingly high up in the right direction, that you know, kind of you have more than you knew you would have before you can, even realize it. So I would say teaching people that. And we, so we just dedicated, we were like, if we're going to live in a closet sized apartment for our first part of our life, we'll do it, because we just don't want to have to be enslaved to debt and that kind of thing. And then we did the tithing, even though at the time it felt hard. It felt hard to me. I don't have the gift of giving. Bill has the gift of giving. So I have to say, yeah, that felt more sacrificial. But then over time, you just make lifestyle choices that then fit within that. I mean, hey, most people in America are some of the wealthiest in the world, even, compared, like, we're not living in, you know, a shack in some country where we don't have running water, et cetera. So I think just learning those lifestyle habits, being committed to them. And I think it was the portal that God used to sanctify me the most through life. He just kind of kept showing layers of where I was either fearful, greedy, or not trusting in him, and saying, these are areas you can surrender and trust me. And so I would say, looking back, it's been a really joyful journey, but for me, it wasn't always joyful at the beginning. But now I'm free of anxiety, I'm free of worry, because I've seen I can trust him along the way. Doesn't mean we won't suffer, but then it would be not based on what I've done. It's like, okay, that's the Lord's will. So
Yeah. 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 There's something about like letting go. And like if you get it, when we get into trouble and it's our fault, it's like one thing, but if like God steers us in that.
exactly.
So I guess I'm curious, I mean, talk about just, you mentioned like greed as an example. And in America, I think we probably have a lot of greed. Maybe we want to dismiss it. I think there's a couple layers. We're so wealthy, but because we live in America in a bubble, we don't necessarily see how wealthy we are compared to other parts of the world. And so the greed piece, I think, ties into that. What would you speak into both how wealthy we are and how the greed plays part? Maybe even in some.
Yeah, it's a really great point. It goes to, I think, a really important point of living below your means. Dana talked about the eighth wonder of the world being compound interest. According to Albert Einstein, the ninth wonder has got to be live below your means. Because if you can learn to spend less than you earn, you will quickly see the joy and the freedom that comes from having a surplus. And this is why Proverbs talks about the importance of being like the ant that stores up, not like the grasshopper that eats everything right away. And I think we kind of look around at other people and we tell ourselves, well, we have to do it this way. I remember some people we knew who were facing incredible possible bankruptcy and just heavy debt. And they went to Disney World on vacation. And they said, well, got to go on vacation. Well, where's that written that you have to go on vacation to Disney World, right? And I think we tell ourselves that we need things that we don't need. And you can adjust. It does require self-discipline. It does require giving up some of your natural desires. My goodness. Like, I remember when I was fired at one point, never something you want to face. I thought that would never happen to me. It did. But we had savings because we had been able to save about 10% a year for the last like 7 years. This was early on in our marriage. And we looked at it and we're like, yeah, we could go for a year. We're, I don't want to be unemployed for a year. And I wasn't, but it wasn't catastrophic. It wasn't like, my gosh, how many days do I go till, I'm really in big trouble. So I think part of it is get your blinders off and look at how most of the world lives and know that you are among the wealthiest people in the world if you have household income of $74,000 a year, which is the median household income in the US. That makes you rich worldwide.
Yeah. I would like to get your thoughts on the idea, let's go the other extreme, the hoarding side of it. I once met a guy who lived well below his means. He made a few hundred, lived on 30% of it. And I asked him one day, like, if you just lost your job and you couldn't get any money for like when would you run out of money? And he was like thinking about it. He says, think about 10 years. And I was like, well, what are you like worried about? Because he just seemed worried about the money stuff. And so I think that's the other extreme is sort of like this, and I think there's some stuff in his own story that probably lend.
Well, I have a tendency towards hoarding. And I think it is because maybe I think there's what ifs. I think too many what ifs. So I need a lot of contingencies and a lot of safety nets. And what I've learned is there are some safety nets that are prudent, right? But if you have too many, it says something about you. It says that you're trusting in your barns. That parable of
Mhm.
the guy who got a huge harvest, he built his barns, and now he can relax and enjoy. It's like, no, you can't trust in those things. And so, yes, be prudent. It's kind of it's a tension between living with like how the ant, of saving up correctly and then you don't want to be a hoarder either. So there's both sides. And also if you are, so hoarding would be saying, I need these things to keep me safe. And savings, long-term planning savings is, what am I doing? How am I stewarding those again for my needs, my family's needs, and for uh, what God wants me to do in the world? So if I would imagine hoarders, if they're all nervous about it, they don't have a plan for those resources. Like if they had a plan, then they're on a mission. So there's a reason they're living on 30% of their income. It's because they're trying to deploy those resources for God's kingdom. But if they're only deploying it for their safety, we know that you can never have enough to be safe in this world.
If in 1 Timothy 6, Jason, it says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us for everything for our enjoyment. So that notion of putting your hope in riches, it's really easy to do. One of the couples that we highlight in our book, they were billionaires for a time. And we asked this couple about where Jesus said, the deceitfulness of wealth, which chokes out faith, when he's talking about the parable of the sower. So we asked him, what is it that's deceitful about wealth? And without missing a beat, Dennis Baki said, the illusion of control. It's that thought that I'm protecting myself. Nothing can happen to me. Oh, that's an illusion.
Yeah, that's kind of the word that can control. So it's cool that you brought it up. I imagine as a billionaire, you can control more things, but even if you realize how much you can't control, I guess the evening of the playing field is death, right? None of us can constrict that, and that's the thing that brings us to our knees, right?
Really
That's
true.
Yeah. So, what else would you guys want to share that you haven't?
I have one, Dana, if I could jump in. Um, One is the importance of keeping track of your spending. And I think a lot of people don't really know where their money goes. And if you keep track, which has become ever easier with all these great programs out there, we use Quicken. I know there's a whole bunch of programs. If you have a credit card or a debit card, you can electronically download it to one of these programs. It will assign a category, and then you just go through. And in about 10 minutes, you look at, in the last week, you look at all your expenses and you make sure that everything's properly assigned. Boom. Within 3 months, you have a great record of your expenses, and you might be shocked to find out how much money you're spending at Starbucks, and you're like, "What?" Right? I mean, like, start looking at your expenses and seeing where they're going. So another superpower, and it was Socrates who said, "The unexamined life is not worth living," and we would argue, it's really hard to be a good steward when you're not really sure where your money's going.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would add to do some of your discerning of how you're going to manage your resources in community. And I think it's because we tend to lie to ourselves, and self-deceit is so easy, particularly in money. And so if you know that you're going to open your books to other people pretty transparently and say, do you think I'm following what the Lord would have for me? Do you think I am doing the right thing with this? Just that transparency itself will is a powerful force, but it also means you can celebrate with others too. That you don't want to just be guilt. Like, I don't want to be a giver that's doing it just out of guilt. Like, no, you could celebrate with other people too. And so I would say, try to find, again, the right kind of person who's safe and isn't going to judge you, but is just going to help you, admonish you, and encourage you along the way of your stewardship and generosity journey.
Yeah. So if someone's hearing this and they're like, okay, this is an
stewardsnotowners.com. That's www.stewardsnotowners.com. And there they'll see book excerpts and interviews with some of the people in our book and a plethora of resources of other things they could read. Could also buy our book, Stewards Not Owners, The Joy of Aligning Your Money with Your Faith. You can buy it on our website. You can buy it at Blockbuster, where that comes from, on Amazon.
They
on
did not steward their business well.
Yeah, right. Barnes and Noble, Simon and Schuster, it's all kinds of places. We have an audio form. We've got it on Kindle. So that's another place. Ours is not the only good book on stewardship. We love Crown Ministries. They have all kinds of great free resources on their website. So lots of things out there to do it. So we're not trying to figure out how to sell books. By the way, whatever we make in our book, we give that away anyway. We're really just trying to invite people into this joy of stewardship.
Yeah. Now, is it worth talking about the organizations you're a part of? Would those be?
I would say look at faithdriveninvestor.org if you want to start on this journey of how to align your investments with your faith. Lots of free resources, podcasts, small groups for other people that are on this journey. Great resources there. And then if you're interested in starting some kind of mini endowment for your own family's charitable giving and you want to do that, there's two places. There's the National Christian Foundation is a wonderful donor advised fund if you want to work mostly with nonprofits. And then if you want to invest some of that charitable money into transformational companies, so for profits, then you could come to impactfoundation.org. And that's another donor advised fund that works very closely with National Christian Foundation for impact, what we call impact investing.
I guess that makes me think of one other thing that I would like to ask. I have a coaching client that I work with. His kids are older and like they're graduating high school kind of age. And he wants to figure out ways to use their money as a family, investing in things together and in business endeavors.
We've not done family investing. We know that there are people who do that, right? Who kind of bring that all together. I don't know if we've gotten our kids enough to that place. Dana, you're going to look like you're going to say something.
Well, if he's talking about family giving, there's all kinds of ways you can get your kids involved in, like, okay, we as a family are going to give away X amount, 5,000 this year. And we are going to all talk about, pray about, and think about one place. And we're going to go, maybe to this ministry and say, we have $5,000. Can you give us 3 different options that your ministry would benefit from? And then we as a family are going to pray about it and decide how to, so that's a real tangible thing that you can do. For investing, again, I've seen families do impact investing that does take that's usually a minimum of 25,000. But for families who want to do that, again, contact us at impactfoundation.org, and we can certainly give you some training materials and ways that families, and especially families that are like multi-generational, they're trying to train the next generation to manage those resources well. There's certainly a lot of ways you can invest together into areas you both care about.
Yeah, the part of the catalyst for him talking about this was he saw his parents and his father, like they kind of did what you were describing earlier. Like they do their work, they retire, and then they kind of live their life they use the money for themselves. And you're saying, do something different. And that's kind of how he felt like, I want to do something different than that, like not just make it about. So he's
Yeah. Well, even some of these companies, like the Masaka Creamery and others, they take investment, and sometimes you can do as small as a $5,000 investment or something. There's ways to do that as a family, and then you might want to go visit the. We went and visited the cashew company in Mozambique as a family 6 years ago or so. That was
yeah.
hugely transformational for our kids.
Well,
That's called Sunshine Nuts.
okay. And
Well, they'd have to contact Dom and Terry Larson and find out if that's what we did. We said we'd love to come out and visit your company and see what you do. So they took us through their factory. They were kind enough to have us in their home for a few days. But there's a lot of these companies in Africa that you can visit if you're interested in investing. It depending on, let's say, there's some that are doing uh, uh, ethical mining, for example, or fisheries that are trying to make sure that they're not using slave labor, or so there's all kinds of these various I would say go to faithdrivenentrepreneur.org and see what some of these companies overseas are doing, and see if you can visit some of them. And usually they're raising some kind of capital, either equity or debt, or something that you can participate with them.
oh, okay, cool. Yeah, that's interesting.
We could talk all day. Don't be afraid, and start with a single prayer and just say, Lord, you own me and you own everything I have. Help me to learn how.
Yeah. Well, Dana,
Oh, thank you, Jason.
yeah. The Share Life podcast.
Thanks, Jason.